Hello and welcome to the first episode of my new podcast, which I'm going to call the Weekly AI Yap, where I'm just going to be yapping about AI for like 20-30 minutes, and it's just going to be like a rundown of the news, plus some of my thoughts on it, and whatnot. Maybe in the future I'll have some guests, and then we like bounce ideas back and forth, but right now it's just me, just yapping about the state of AI, a bunch of new models, and like what I think of it, like for like the next like 20-30 minutes, right? And so now, I guess we should probably cover the two big pieces of news in like the past week-ish. Might have been a little bit more than a week because this is the first one. But like it's OpenAI's O1 model as well as Quen 2.5, right? So you have OpenAI's O1 model, which is effectively a fine-tuned similar to Reflection 70B on top of GPT 4.0, like they call it like 4.0 with reflection and all the stuff. And this makes the model perform a lot better at like benchmarks and stuff that involves a lot of thinking because it's effectively chain of thought prompting in the model, and they fine-tune the chain of thought by doing some reinforcement learning on some programming tasks, right? And so I think I really just want to drill a little bit deeper into the reinforcement learning aspect of this, right? Because chain of thought is something we've done a while. That's just a prompt, right? You just prompt the model. You just go and you're like, hey, I want you to think about your steps before you do them, or like lay out all the information, then decide the next plan and whatnot, right? And then obviously O1's being a little bit more fancy. They're probably doing some like Monte Carlo tree search or stuff like that. But I think fundamentally the big thing with O1 is the fact that in order to train it, they didn't really use like RLHF or any of that. They probably did a little bit of it, but it was mainly like reinforcement learning on like programming problems, right? So what they did is, at least this is from what I hear, is they took the O1, right, or like a previous training, and they said, do these programming problems. Go and solve them, right? Like, think out your chain of thought and whatnot. They got the model to think, and then they effectively had a model that could solve programming problems better, right? And so now what you have is you have the models learning in real environments, and then with reinforcement learning, it's like if they solve it, that's good. Keep going in that direction. If they didn't solve it, that's bad. Go in the other direction, right? And so now what you have is you have a model that's effectively able to learn from the environment, right? And so I think this is the really key thing here, at least for me, because O1 is not the best model, right? It's not like a step change in terms of intelligence. It's a step change in terms of prompt, instead of like ease of prompting, or like if you have a quick problem and you just need to ask an LLM, it's like it's the best in the world, right? Like it will absolutely destroy Limsys Arena, and that's what we see it do, right? It's kind of optimized for that. Let me ask it first, Limsys Arena type stuff. And even though it still fails in some of the stuff, like the strawberry question and whatnot, right? But like, I think this is like a cool pathway to go down if it didn't require also a like exponential increase in like inference time compute, right? Because what you have is you effectively have the inference time compute, like OpenAI showed a graph, right? Where it's basically just like you on the x-axis you have the inference time compute, and on the y-axis you have the like level and like certain benchmarks, right? I think it was AIM, but like the y-axis and the x-axis, it looks like a linear function, but they plotted the x-axis, it was like a log plot of compute, right? So in essence, for every like step you go up in the x-axis, you're going up by like 2x or like 10x or whatever the base is, they didn't say, right? So in order to get like a 3x improvement, you might need like 1,000x compute increase. It's probably closer to like a much smaller number, like maybe it's like 27, 30x, but like it's still a large compute increase, right? Like you need a lot of compute for this model at inference time, and I think that's probably its biggest shortcoming, right? Because this model's also just expensive, right? Like I believe it was like O1 full, when at least when it comes out, will be like $60 per million tokens, right? And O1 mini is cheaper. I believe it's like 15 per million tokens of output, right? I'm only talking about output tokens, but like it's not really that much because you're also being charged for the extra output tokens and generating the chain of thought, and also not letting you see that, right? So what you have is you're generating a ton of extra chain of thought tokens that you're not able to see, but you're still paying for, right? And if we assume that the ratio between chain of thought and actual is like 4 to 1 or 5 to 1, right? You're effectively paying at that point like 5 to 6 times the base price. So O1 is effectively like $300 per million tokens, or like $360 per million tokens, and at least for me, that just feels way too expensive, right? Like, I think something like a Claude Opus 3.5 at $75 per million tokens is just going to be a lot better, right? Because with O1, you're forced into those extra prices, whereas with Opus 3.5, it's probably going to be similar to Sonnet 3.5, where it's a very smart model, right? Like Sonnet 3.5 is a very smart model, but then you can do one shot with it if you want. You can chain of thought prompt it if you want. With O1, you're forced to do chain of thought prompting, and you can't see the chain of thought, right? Because OpenAI doesn't want people to train on the data. But the problem with OpenAI not wanting people to train on their data is now you're just kind of stuck with a model that is like great. Now it's more expensive than what I'm actually getting, right? Like I hesitate to call this a scam, but like, yes, you're now paying for things, you're not gonna get the things, right? If OpenAI just said $300 per million tokens, you only pay for output, that would be a lot more fine for me, right? But this is like a hidden, like sort of situation, right? Like the real costs are hidden to you. You can't actually see it. And the only way you can get the actual cost of your specific use case, because it will think for different amounts for different use cases, is if you like go into the like API dashboard, get your total billing, and you also find the amount of tokens you generated, and then like find the effective for your thing, right? Because different use cases will have different things, right? And so this is a very far cry from what a bunch of people in the open source community are doing, which is like lowering inference costs, right? Because like Llama 3, 4, or 5B is like $3 per million tokens on a few API providers. And so now what you have is you either have Llama 3, 4, or 5B for $3 per million tokens, or O1 for $60 per million tokens. I'm only talking output, by the way. I'm only talking output tokens, right? Or you have O1 at $60 per million tokens output, or O1 mini at $15 per million tokens output. But in reality, it's going to be a lot more expensive for the output, right? So it's probably closer to like $300 for O1, or something like $90 per million tokens for O1 mini, right? Though, of course, numbers could change based on what you're doing, right? And so, even if you take the base case, Llama 3, 4, 5B is at least 5x cheaper than O1 mini, right? And at least for me, I think it'd probably be better to just have like an ensemble of like 5 Llama 3, 4, 5Bs that all like compare answers to each other. And then there you go, like you have a model that's like the same price and probably the same performance, right? You're having more inference time compute, you're matching price of O1 mini, and it's probably match up, right? I haven't tested it, but like my instincts tell me it'll match up. Compared to like O1, like the real O1, having 20 Llama 3, 4, 5Bs, and then like doing like effectively having an ensemble of them, like that feels like it'll match up really well against like actual O1, right? Like I don't fully see the reason why this model is better than previous models, because here's the thing, right? If you take inference time compute and you just make it like cheaper and cheaper, now you're able to run more models simultaneously. So you're getting an intelligence increase from a price decrease because you're able to do ensembles of multiple models, right? Like I don't know if something, because like Llama 3.1 8B, right, is a bunch of API products, 10 cents per million tokens API out, right? And so I don't know if having like 150 Llama 3.1 8Bs, or maybe like 100 and like you have another 50 for like collation and whatnot, is going to be that much materially worse than O1 mini, right? Because you just have so many llamas that they're effectively going to exhaust the entire problem space, right? So you effectively can do more like Monte Carlo tree search, like problem space, like exploration, if you just use like a lot of Llama 3.1 8Bs than if you just use O1 mini, right? So I don't actually, like O1 is a really cool concept, right? The reinforcement learning used here is very cool, right? But I fundamentally don't know if it's actually that much of an intelligence step change that it just, like I think O1 is probably very similar to reflection, right? They even call it forward reflection, right? Very similar to reflection 70B, where it will perform a lot better at benchmarks, right? Because the model is like innately trained with chain of thought, but because it's innately trained with chain of thought, you lose flexibility on actually using the model. The prices will be higher, and the model in the real world will perform roughly the exact same as a well-prompted model that came before, right? And I think, like, even if you look at like something like ArcAGI, right, which I think is probably a pretty good sense of like the AI model's general intelligence, though it's not perfect by any means. Like O1 is very similar to Claude 3.5 Sonnet, right? It's a pretty similar amount of general intelligence. It's just the difference is O1 is obviously a lot more expensive, right? Because Claude 3.5 Sonnet is $15 per million tokens of output, whereas O1 or O1 mini, I think they use O1. Did they use O1 or O1 mini? I don't really remember. They might have had both. But they were all like, in fact, very similar to Claude 3.5 Sonnet, and it's like O1 mini is the same price, and O1 is a lot more expensive. And in ArcAGI, they almost certainly have the O1 mini and O1 having chain of thought, because that's part of the prompt, and then it's going to be more expensive, right? For like the same level of intelligence, right? Like, because if you have a good RAG pipeline, and you have like good search and whatnot, like Llama 3.1 8B can solve most of your queries, and it's for any like real use case. Like I hesitate to see O1's full usage, right? And I think this is probably a bigger issue with like OpenAI as a whole, because OpenAI they've kind of, instead of being focused on like just making smarter and smarter models, they're now trying to like advertise themselves, right? Because they're moving from like a non-profit to a for-profit. We need to make money on the API, but they're not like Google, Microsoft, or Facebook, where their AI research teams can just operate at a loss forever because the research of those AI research teams can go to a whole bunch of products. OpenAI's product is the model. Google's product is Google Vertex AI. So you use a bunch of your, you like go to Google Cloud and you say, I want to run Llama 3, 4, 5 on Google Cloud. I want to run Gemini on Google Cloud. Like Gemini isn't their product. The apps they build on top of Gemini is the product, and also you can do it via Google Cloud, right? Like Gemini just helps them build a better Google Assistant. It helps them build like a better call scanner. It doesn't help Gemini is not the main product. OpenAI's only product is their models and also ChatGPT, the service, right? And so, because OpenAI is losing a ton of money right now, even though they have like Microsoft funneling cash in and getting a whole bunch of investments from a bunch of places, I think that because you have like the need of like we need to actually like make money eventually, right? Because they're losing a ton of money. Because I think the rumors are like $5 billion a year, which is like insane burn rate. But they also, the rumors are that investors are really wanting to give them money. Like you have that, and then the other labs, they're just able to be like lose money, right? Like Meta, like they'll be happy losing a ton of money on Llama. Probably because Mark Zuckerberg's also really invested in Llama, but also because FAIR is a research organization. They do LLMs because it's cool research. They don't do LLMs because it's their product, right? Like OpenAI started out as a research lab. They do LLMs. They made GPT 1, 2, 3 because they were a research organization, not because they were making a product. They released GPT 3.5 via ChatGPT and caused this whole thing in like December 2022 because they just wanted to share their research in a manner that was safe. They didn't want, like, originally I don't believe their goal was to productize it, but because it became big, they realized they had a product here, so they decided to start productizing it, right? And like OpenAI, I think they just have the issue where, as I've been saying, the product is the model, and so they have no moat, right? Because if you go back to that one Google memo like a few years back of like we have no moat and neither does OpenAI, and they were saying Llama will take over because it's open source. Like they're saying the open source models will take over because they will always be cheaper and there's no moat. Model creators have no moat. And I think that's something we've been seeing over the past few years, right? Where model creators have no moat, but the GPT wrappers that everybody said had no moat actually have a moat because UX is hard, right? And creating models is also hard, but when all of these companies are working at creating models, the price war is insane, right? Because you have Llama and all the open source providers being effectively dirt cheap, right? You can get so many tokens out of the 8B. If you need more intelligence, the 70B is right there. It's like 7 to 9x more expensive output token wise, and it's just like so dirt cheap, right? That like, because like I did the math a while back. For 1 billion tokens of Llama 3.1 8B, it's like $100, right? So for like $100, you can have effectively unlimited text that you can read, right? Whereas Google's also here. Google had to release Gemini 1.5 Flash. It is an incredibly cheap model, and they've had to like do like context caching and all of that. It's like a really cheap model. DeepSeek's over here. Okay, DeepSeek's a wild thing because they don't actually have access to many GPUs. I don't know how they're making their prices that low, but like 28 cents output like per million tokens is insane for DeepSeek 2.5. It's an insane price. OpenAI had to drop the price of 4.0 recently to like $10 per million tokens because of the price competition. Claude 3.5 Sonnet, Anthropic isn't actually too into the price war. I think $50 is probably like a fair price for 3.5 Sonnet, but like they've had to release Sonnet, and Haiku's certainly one of the bigger models, right? Because it's cheaper. Because Opus is expensive. Opus is a really expensive model. $75 per million tokens is a very expensive model. Right? I don't think GPT-4 ever actually reached that price. I think GPT-4's max price was like 45 per million. No, it might have been 60. It might have been 60. Don't quote me on that, right? And so you just have this like price war, and it's like you have no moat because the only thing you're competing on is intelligence versus price, right? Intelligence and price, and it's like okay, let's just improve intelligence and lower price. Pretty simple. Whereas with UX, like there's a lot of stuff you can do. There's a lot of UI stuff you can do. There's a lot of stuff you can do. And I think about the these GPT wrappers, what we're seeing, right, is that they have more moat. They have a lot more moat than everybody. Their moat is like good because like copying UX is hard. Like making a good UX is hard, right? And so a few years back when people actually talked about these GPT wrappers, it's actually kind of funny that like, it's like, hey, let's go laugh at this guy because all he's doing is a weekend project building kind of ChatGPT. But it turns out his UX is good. The UX is good. People love using the product, and then it's like, cool, we have a moat now, right? Because we have users, people using a product. Whereas the LLMs, there's no moat. Oh, you're switching endpoints? Cool. You switch from OpenAI to like locally hosted Olama. Cool. Olama has OpenAI compatible endpoints. You don't have to change your code. You just have to change the URL it's going to, right? And so it's actually really interesting because now OpenAI, they come out with O1 and they're effectively competing on saying, hey, our model is the smartest. You can just throw it in there and it will just work, right? It may be expensive, but it will just work. It's very smart. And it feels like it's a research organ more like a business org. Whereas Meta Fair feels like a research org, right? And even Quen, right? I forget who actually makes Quen. Is it Alibaba? I think Alibaba makes Quen. So I might be confusing it with Yi. No, I think Alibaba is the guys behind Quen. Right? They released Quen 2.5, right? And they have a whole list of models, and they're all world beaters, right? Like they had a nice graph of like MMLU scores greater than this, and it's like intelligence versus price, right? And so now what you can do with like I believe they compared it to a 3B model, right? With the 3B model is equivalent to what you had to do with 70B model like 3 years ago, right? So in essence, the price has gone down like 20x over like 3 years, which is insane, right? Like you don't see this in any other industry, because the thing about the AI industry is that it's built on a whole bunch of different exponentials that are all stacking, right? You have Moore's law, right, which effectively means the price of compute goes down by 2x every 5 years. You have all the new algorithmic improvements, right, which that means that, I guess the main thing is the algorithmic improvements and the data improvements, right? And so you have the algorithmic improvements that those are probably like also another like 2x of, it's probably closer to like a 5x every like 2 years, right? So that's an innate 10x every 2 years that you have with this research going on here. You have the data increase, so people are being able to handle bigger and bigger data sets, right? Because Llama 3.1 was trained on 15 trillion tokens, and I believe the new Quen is like 10 trillion, I think? Like Quen 2.5? I don't remember the exact number, right? And so now the price of the intelligence, right? So because now you have a 3B model that's trained on like these massive data sets, and now the price is like following that like nice like exponentially downwards curve. And so yeah, you have the innate 10x from just like algorithmic improvements and whatnot. You probably get an extra 2x from just like more data sets and being better skilled at handling data. There's a 20x in 2 years, right? So you have a whole bunch of like exponential price decreases all stacking together. And so now you have much cheaper models. And I think the Quen method of like making like different intelligence differentials is better than the OpenAI method, right? Because OpenAI is like, let's just let it run in like inference time for longer. Whereas Quen is just like, you pick how big the model you want to be is, right? Like if you're running on small amounts of hardware, pick the 3B, pick the 1.5B, pick the 0.5B. If you have a lot of hardware, pick the 70B, right? And so, in essence, you have this tiered model system, and I like that a lot more. I personally like that a lot more, because that lets me, the application developer, customize it, instead of having to hope OpenAI customizes it for me. And OpenAI is probably going to add like tuners and knobs, like, hey, I wanted to think longer, I wanted to think less, I want to maximize my thinking time. But like, in all seriousness, I would much rather have more control as the application developer. There is no situation where I would ever want less control, right? And so, yeah, Quen is a model that you could just like effectively mix and match. They have so many different like options there. Because they have the regular ones, they have the math version and the code version, right? So if you're dealing with something that's like very math heavy, right? If you're making like a chat assistant for like a like academic like STEM setting, right? Use the math model. It will be better at dealing with math questions, right? Like if you're making something like a coding assistant, use the code models. Use like all of the code models they have, right? And so you now have like picking capabilities. Because if you're trying to build like your own like in IDE autocomplete, kind of like GitHub Copilot, hey, just use the code models and you can ignore the other stuff. You have so much choice and freedom in picking the models you use, right? And then you also have the capability of like combining the models, right? Something similar to DeepSeek v2.5. Because what DeepSeek v2.5 is it's DeepSeek 2 and DeepSeek 2 Coder just combined into one model, right? They just take the two models and just combine it into one, and then boom, you have a much smarter model now. And so what you have is you effectively have like more control over like what you do and what you don't do. And I know I'm talking about these Chinese companies really highly, right? Because they're doing amazing stuff. Like DeepSeek's context caching was kind of the model, and a bunch of other context caching did. Like I know Google did context caching first, right? Google did context caching first. But the thing about Google's context caching is you kind of had to set that up, and it was more of an infra thing because it was meant for Google Cloud, right? It's meant for Google Cloud, and then they price it weird. Whereas with DeepSeek, they just said, "Alright, it's 90% cheaper if you use the same context within the next like 5 minutes or whatever," right? Like it was very dirt simple. Anthropic's copying now. I think OpenAI will probably copy it soon because they're all in the price war, and a whole bunch of the llama providers will copy it soon. And it's just like we're in a massive price war right now, and I think the Chinese companies are kind of winning because they've kind of been forced to be efficient, right? Because you need to have efficiency because you're hardware constricted, right? You have US export restrictions. You don't have access to as much hardware. And they're trading on like 4090s and whatnot that they've like manually resoldered the RAM onto so they have more VRAM. So they're having like custom made extended VRAM 4090s that they're trading on. And it's like insanely cool, right? But under these hardware restrictions, you're now forced to like trade models cheaper. You're forced to like inference models cheaper. And so now, because DeepSeek is a quant firm, right? Like they're used to dealing with like a whole bunch of high compute things because, you know, quantitative research, well, quantitative finance, right? Because DeepSeek is a quant firm who was told by the Chinese government to be like, hey, you got to do something actually useful, right? And so they effectively just went and said, all right, we're making AI models now. You have that level of talent, right? Like imagine, like a tweet I saw about this, and I think probably explains it the best, right? And I don't actually know too much about how China works, but like it's imagine if you had Citadel and also OpenAI, and they were the same company, and everybody wants to work for them. They have access to the best talent in China, and China is a country with 1.3 billion people, right? They have the best talent in that country, and China is also very STEM like focused and heavy, right? And so you have the best, you have to have the best people working on these models, and you can go kind of insane with it. You can straight up go kind of insane with it. And DeepSeek is a very insane model. It's so good. It's a really good model, right? And I think you probably have a similar thing happening with Quen. You just, instead of Quen being like OpenAI plus Citadel, it's probably similar to like Amazon, right? Where it's like people want to work there, and they're going to have access to the best talent, right? It's going to be the best talent. And they're making amazing models. They're making like really good models, right? And they're cheap because they have to deal with hardware restrictions. They have to deal with compute decisions. If you compare this with like OpenAI or Meta or XAI or Google, right? Like OpenAI does not really have hardware restrictions. They just have to go ask Microsoft, hey, we need more compute so we can train GPT-5 or like O1 or like Strawberry or Orion or whatever. And Microsoft's going to be like, yeah, sure. Or maybe they won't, and then they'll go to like other companies, right? They have access to compute. XAI, so Twitter AI, right? The people behind Grok, G-R-O-K, not Q. They bought like 100,000 H100s, and they have an order for like 100,000 B100s, I think? Maybe H200s, I don't fully remember. But they have an order for a massive number of GPUs. Meta has like 300k H100,000s. Not thousands, H100s. They have 300k of them, right? Like, they're compute filled. Whereas the Chinese teams, they don't have compute. They don't have access to that kind of compute. And so what they're forced to do is they're forced to get creative. And that creativity leads to lower prices. And especially when they're also making open models, right? They're not making closed models, they're making open models that are all really good. Everybody gets access to computer optimizations, right? Because DeepSeek, they're the people behind Mixture of a Million Experts. They trained a model with a ton of experts. And so now, inference cost is really like dirt cheap, right? So you have a ton of weights that you can modify for training, but the inference is like dirt cheap because you're only using a few of those experts at a time. And so what you have is effectively the ability to do a dirt cheap model. And like, I expect that to show up elsewhere, right? And I think open sources focus on cost, right? Because open source is kind of generally under a hardware restriction. Unless you're like Meta open sourcing Llama, right? But like everybody else is like kind of under a hardware restriction. And so I think that's where all the creativity comes from. And that's what leads to the price decreases, right? Like, I think a lot of open source is kind of right now focused on like how can we make price smaller? How can we increase intelligence for the same price? Like, open source isn't really making those like 1 trillion parameter models, or like even the 400 billion parameter models. Because Llama 3.1, 4, or 5b, That's just Meta gracing us with that, right? Like, there's not many fine tunes of that. There's not much research built on top of the 405. Most of the new research is built on top of the 8B and the 70B, right? Because those are sizes people actually can deal with. If you're dealing with the 405B, those are sizes you can only deal with at like a massive scale, and it's not really useful for that much research, right? And so, in essence, because closed source doesn't actually have to care about open source research, they can go crazy with model sizes. And then because open source has to care about sizes, costs, because research is expensive and whatnot, because it is compute limited, they have to be a lot more creative. And so a lot of research happens on the 8B. The Chinese teams, which are also hardware restricted, and so they also do open source, they're also dealing with hardware restrictions, and costs go down, right? And so that brings this all back. OpenAI's O1 model, because it's effectively OpenAI saying, we don't care about inference costs, throw money at the problem, and like, we have AGI, they're not calling it AGI, but like, throw money at the problem, and we have like the 120 IQ model. It's like, okay, you're throwing money at the problem. When you throw that much money at the problem, you can just hire a guy, right? And I think if you're comparing these models in price to just hiring a guy, it's gonna be like, it's too expensive. It's straight up too expensive, right? Because there is no person who could write for the same price as Llama 3.1 8B. There are almost certainly people who can write for the same price as GPT-4o, right? Because if you need somebody to write like 1,000,000 words and you're paying them like $300, $400, like, you can probably see somebody that's willing to do that. That's probably a dirt cheap number, but you can probably hire somebody in like India or like Nigeria or something that's probably willing to write that much for that price, right? Whereas there is no human being on Earth that can compete with Llama 3.1 8B, right? And so, you effectively, I think O1, in summary, I think O1 is too expensive, open source is being very price optimized, and I think that's why open source will win in the end, because nobody wants to pay insane prices for stuff. And I think I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening to this episode, the first episode of the Weekly AI Yap, which is my AI podcast I want to release every week. I might bring on guests in the future. If you want any guests, send me a comment asking for them. I don't know if I'll actually be able to bring them on because I am a guy with like less than 100 subscribers. But like, thank you for watching. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.